You know, there's always been this one problem I've been seeing in Genshin Impact for the longest time imaginable. That problem being that the lore in Genshin Impact is absolutely phenomenal, but the dialogue is being represented with in-game is utter garbage.
This is not a banger. This is not a banger. And I know bangers. I know bangers.
It's not even a question at this point. We all know and feel it every time we have to do like literally any quest, and Paimon's just there yapping all the time. The lore for Genshin Impact is so great that I once attempted to read it. I started off in Mondstadt and I literally just got lost so fast. I started clicking on links. I started reading about this bitch named Vanessa or something and how she turned into an ego when she died. And I realized this was only the first nation, and there was no way in hell I could ever integrate myself into the entire lore of Teyvat. So I just gave up on reading it after a while and never returned to it again. I seriously don't know how these lore YouTubers do it, but man, they got to have the brain the size of a sperm whales for this shit. But more importantly, inside of all of this lore, we all have, these amazing stories about these characters that we all know and love to this day. All kinds of stories ranging from death, destruction, love, loss, just all types of different stories about these characters we love so much. And when I first heard about the concept of a story quest in this game for these characters, I immediately thought in my head, holy shit, you mean to tell me I can experience a story from this character and learn more about them? You mean to tell me you're gonna take me on a past or future journey with this cool character I love so much and make me either learn something more about them that I didn't know beforehand or understand them more as a character, even more than I already probably do? That just sounds amazing. That's one of the greatest ideas you could ever create, to help the players know more about these characters as you're marketing towards them. More importantly, to help the players connect with these characters throughout the multiple stories and pieces of lore that they are all intertwined with. Actually, let's not do that. That would just make way too much sense now, wouldn't it? No. You see, how about this, right? I got a better idea for that. Instead, how about we just spawn an NPC, make that NPC have a problem or their own story that specifically needs to be fixed or explored by the 5-star character we're actually there for, and then that'll just be the entire story quest for that 5-star character. Brilliant idea, man. What a jolly good show indeed. Yeah, you know what? Let's not take any of the possible pre-existing pieces of lore and stories about these characters and adapt those pieces of lore into an actual story quest for said character. No, we're not doing that. You see, because this random NPC who lost his shit-stained underwear in a dungeon needs our help and desperately needs that underwear back because that underwear was handed down through their entire bloodline. But you see, it's all actually very important helping these unimportant NPCs because it helps build the world around us and makes us learn more about those who live within it. Yeah, buddy, look, I'm sorry to burst your fucking bubble, but that's kind of what world quests are for. Did you just happen to forget about that? Did you just blow in from Stupid Town? All jokes aside, this issue that I'm going to be talking about with Genshin Impact today is an issue I have had and noticed for a very, very long time. And I don't know if anybody else has really given a thorough explanation of this issue, that is, if it's even considered an issue. I'm not really sure. But I've noticed a very huge problem in almost every single 5-star story quest. And that issue is that a lot of these story quests are actually NPC story quests. Now, what am I talking about when I say the term NPC story quest? Well, when you take a look at these story quests at face value, obviously you will notice that these story quests are specifically made and tailored for almost every 5-star in the game. The term story quest would imply that once we begin any of these quests for any of these specific 5-star characters, we receive a story about said 5-star character in specific. So if you're over the age of like, I don't know, 0, you'd expect to learn something new about that 5-star you didn't know about before, experience that 5-star, go through an event that makes them a different character or the character that they are today. In short, you would expect that said 5-star character to be the main focus of the story in said story quest. While that can sometimes be the case, it definitely isn't always that. There are many 5-star story quests that do this really weird and honestly annoying thing where they introduce some random ass NPC who either has some sort of problem or has their own story to tell and focuses on that aspect about the NPC rather than the 5-star we're actually there for. Some story quests are more egregious with this action compared to others, but it usually always results in the spotlight primarily being on that NPC. I never understood why the team who works on Genshin Impact does this with these characters, especially when most of these 5-stars have pre-written lore that is not only more interesting than these story quests we have today, but would actually help the community learn more about these characters on the big screen if they were animated. For example, instead of Sino's story quest basically being a drug smuggling investigation, why don't we get a story about his beginnings of being a general Maharaga? Wait, hold on, what the fuck did I just say? Wait, no, this has to be some sort of typo in the script. Oh fuck, hey, hold on bro, slow down bro, don't do it. Instead of Ayato's story quest just being about him helping out with some people's marriage, how about we get a story about how he became the head of the Kamisato clan or the Yashiro commissioner? Instead of Yelan's story quest just being about examining candidates to figure out who would be the next Tianxia of the Lei Wei Qingxing, why don't we get a story quest explaining how she single-handedly birthed all life and matter into this universe when there was only darkness that existed before its creation by her? The thing about these story quests too is that I just know that they're made up. They have to be, because I don't see the actual stories in these story quests being mentioned anywhere in the character's actual lore. At least I hope so. If I'm wrong in that, please let me know. But if that's really the truth, then it's even worse, because it would actually take less effort to just adapt an already pre-existing story about the character instead of creating an entirely new one that barely focuses on them. But as I've said before, some story quests are particularly egregious with this aspect compared to others. Not only that, but there are in fact story quests that actually focus on the Firestar character is made for. It's pretty much a hit or miss when it comes to these things. It's like they have two different people cooking up these story quests, but every now and then the dude that actually knows how to write a good story quest just isn't available at the time, so they've got to use the other guy who has no idea what he's doing. So for me to be able to get my point out more directly, I'm going to showcase 6 different story quests. 3 of these story quests will be what I consider good story quests, and then the other 3 story quests will be what I consider bad story quests. For these 2 sections that these story quests will be placed in, all 3 of them will universally share the reasons as to what makes them good story quests or bad story quests. I will give a very brief description about the plot of these story quests before I start discussing their main flaws or strengths. I would also like to mention that these story quests that you currently see on screen are not inherently the best or worst story quests in the game. There may very well be better or worse story quests compared to these. I am just using these story quests as some of the best examples I could find in my personal opinion for what I am talking about. There are many story quests that have the same qualities as these ones I am showcasing. I'm just using these in particular. It is entirely your opinion of whether or not these story quests are good or not, or if they can even be used as examples.
Run that shit back.
The first story quest we're going to be talking about today is Nilou's story quest, and I actually believe this may be one of the most hated story quests by the community to this day, and for good reason too. This quest is absolutely horrendous and mind-numbingly boring to play through. But let's go over the plot of this story quest first. The entire plot of Nilou's story quest is basically about this guy named Sharif, who's a part of the academia, barging his ass into the Zubair Theater, I think that's how you pronounce it, I don't know, I don't really care, and informing everyone that this place is about to get blown the fuck up because the theater isn't intellectual enough for them or something. Basically just the academia not appreciating nor understanding art once again, and therefore choosing to suddenly demolish the theater within 30 days, obviously causing the entire community of people working there to lose everything they have, including Nilou, unless they change Sharif's mind about the meaning of art. Now, you would think that the plot I just described to you doesn't sound bad at all, right? It sounds like it has stakes, there's drama, it sounds pretty entertaining, but most importantly, it's representing a challenge for Nilou that she has to overcome, right? So why is this story quest actually god-awful? Well, firstly, I'm just say like how it is. The entire story quest is kind of like this, but at the very beginning, the dialogue is some of the corniest shit I think I've ever heard within the past 10 years of my life.
That's right, Miss Nilou!
Beat the bad guy! Justice will prevail!
Make him eat dirt!
Leave me alone! Ah!
It's a floater!
This dialogue is the type of shit that would make NPCs from other games call these motherfuckers NPCs. This dialogue is so fucking slow, horrid, and just unimportant. I felt like I had to drink water every 10 pieces of dialogue, otherwise I just fucking shrivel up and die from the sheer amount of boredom and cringe that was being inflicted upon my soul. It's just so uninteresting. Nobody wants to hear a guy ramble about fucking Sumpter Beast, man. But the other reason why this story quest sucks is because while it does technically present a challenge for Nilou to overcome, since she ultimately has to debate Sharif in order to keep the theater from being demolished, that aspect is clearly not being focused on nearly as much as the relationship between Sharif and his daughter, Inaya. You see, Inaya is Sharif's estranged daughter. They have a bad relationship because Sharif was too much of a Korean father and always lambasted Inaya for not being smart or doing something meaningful in her life in his eyes. The relationship between these two is practically the main focus point for the rest of Nilou's story quest, as there's literally just a whole part where we have to find Inaya in the forest because she ran away so that way her father could leave the theater alone. And then we get the whole info dump on their story from her. It's very clear from this point onwards that this story quest isn't really about Nilou at all. The only thing Nilu really does is debate with Sharif at the end, but even then she still didn't even really win herself because Inaya ended up confronting Sharif about the relationship at the end and ended all of it. Actually, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure the bitch was losing until Inaya just ended all of it. At the end of the quest, they did that little cutscene where Inaya and her father start to reconnect, and that's basically the end of Nilu's story quest. Now, the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves here is, did we learn anything about Nilu from her story quest? No. No, we didn't. The only things we might have learned about Nilu here is that she's a very nice and heartwarming person who do anything to protect the theater, which is something we already knew about her, so nothing new there. To be fair, after looking at Nilu's lore, she's not really the most interesting character in the first place. She's literally just the character trope of, I love everybody and everybody loves me, which is not something I necessarily hate, but I just feel like it's a pretty lazy way to write a character sometimes. Besides that, even with Nilu not being a very interesting character, they could have still easily made a way better story quest for her that actually focuses on her and makes the community learn more about her. For instance, in her third character story, they could have adapted that story where she meets her teacher for the first time and discovers the art and passion of dancing, or the story where she obtains her vision, and they probably could have even mashed the two together and make it emotional and beautiful. I feel like that alone would create a better story quest for Nilu because it would be a story that actually focuses on her character and makes us learn something about her that we probably didn't know about beforehand, and shows us why she is the character she is today. This would have been far better by default than the insanely irrelevant garbage that we actually got for her story quest. And look, I don't want to be a complete asshole and say that absolutely nobody cares about these NPCs and their relationship, because that simply isn't the truth, and there is some charm to be had with these NPCs and their story, but having it in a character story quest is simply just not the time nor the place to do so. Once again, you want world building, put it in the world quest, not the story quest where we should be learning about the one character we're actually there for. I feel like Yae Miko's story quest out of all of these 3 bad story quests I'm showcasing today is the most disappointing one, just for the sole reason that Yae Miko is a 500-year-old yokai, but they still decide to make like half of her story quests around 2 NPCs. It is only 8 minutes into Yae Miko's story quest when this fucking NPC named Kato pulls up to the Narukami shrine, pleading for Yae Miko to help his brother who hasn't been acting right recently after some duel he had a week ago, I don't know. So we find his brother sitting in a waterfall, and apparently he's possessed by a spirit because they did some sort of ritual thing from this really popular book that's been spreading around it in Azuma lately. So then Yae Miko, who by the way is actually the best part about this story quest because she's extremely sassy and unserious the whole way through, which is pretty funny, helps exorcise this spirit from Kato's brother, and they go on about their way. Right off the bat, this entire plot is clearly not focusing on Yae Miko as a person, as a character, or as a yokai with tons of stories and history behind her, but rather on 2 NPCs that most of us couldn't give a fuck about, nor will we remember. But it actually gets worse after this act of the story quest, because this is probably the most somewhat entertaining part about this story quest. The rest of it is an absolute snooze fest. All of a sudden, this other NPC appears out of nowhere named Kuroda. No idea how he genuinely found us, but I digress. And he tells Yae Miko that this book those 2 brothers learned a ritual from was actually so popular that it started decreasing market sales for Yae Miko's publishing house. If you don't know what that is, Yae Miko owns a bookstore. And this bookstore is apparently so vitally important to Yae Miko that her entire demeanor changes from an uncaring one to a serious one, and now it is her sole goal to make another book that will beat the popular one in sales. Some people might criticize Yae Miko for acting like this, for not worrying about the real issue that there's people learning actual summoning rituals from a book, but instead about the sales of her publishing house, in which I can't see that argument, but since she is a character that obviously knows what she's doing in a supernatural field, I suppose it is kind of funny for her to care about trivial matters she wouldn't have as much control over, rather than matters she's always been invested in handling her entire life. I mean, after all, I am a guy who absolutely loves the One Punch Man series, and Saitama as a character takes almost nothing seriously, no matter how dire the situation actually is for everyone else, because he knows he could just win any fight when he really wants to and solve the whole problem. But for Yae Miko's story quest, this is where it really becomes a chore, because now we need to figure out how to write a book. And that is boring as all hell. We spend the entire middle part of her story quest figuring out how to write a book and then sell that book in order to beat the popular one. And of course, since we're the main character, the book we wrote beats the other one in popularity. I don't really need to explain why this is boring and uninteresting as shit. It's literally a video game teaching us how to write a book. That's pretty crazy in my opinion. Also, this voice line from Paimon almost sent me to the 7th layer of hell.
Alright, cool. Then let's press on, shall we? Don't give up now. For the sake of our paycheck, get your brain going!
Then the rest of our story quest is us finding out who is the author of that popular book, so that way he doesn't make more books again, which takes us to a dungeon where we get to test out the 5-star we're actually there for, and we do eventually find the author of the book who possesses the travel in order to speak with us because he's a deceased yokai, and then him and Yae Miko essentially have their little catching up chat, which nobody cares about. And at the very end of her story quest, we get a cutscene of her performing a ritual for all of the yokai spirits at the Narukami Shrine as some sort of celebration, and that's basically it for Yae Miko's story quest. Oh, and then it does that annoying thing to waste our time where it makes the 5-star have us wait until the next day to have a useless lunch conversation with them, and then that's actually the end of Yae Miko's story quest. As I've stated beforehand, I believe this is one of the more disappointing story quests because it's just so lackluster for the character that Yae Miko is. She is a 500-year-old yokai. Surely there were some amazing stories that could have been adapted into the game for her instead of this chore of a quest. Like, I don't know, how about the first time she met the Raiden Shogun, or how she got her vision? Just anything cool and interesting from her past or her lore would have been so much more better than this. A bookstore should not be the highlight for this character, especially for a character who is known to be pretty unknown both in game and in the actual community. Yae Miko seems like she would be a pretty interesting character to learn about, but sadly we don't get any of that treatment in her story quest either. Just like Nilou's story quest, I've heard a lot of people have their dissatisfaction with Ayato's story quest, and I can clearly see why. I'm going to make this rundown of Ayato's story quest pretty short because you already know it's going to have that NPC issue as always. Ayato's story quest tells almost nothing about him as a character, or his past, or how he came to be. His story quest is not focused on him at all. Rather, it is focused on these two NPCs named Hiragi Chisato and Kujo Kamenji, which are NPCs we have met before in the Inazuma Archon quest, and their upcoming marriage. But this marriage between the two devolves into a major political issue since not only are they a part of two different clans, but them marrying one another is actually some sort of plan by another clan to overthrow the other one, I think. I don't know, the quest was so much of a snooze fest that my short attention span was nearly sending me into a coma every 10 minutes, so I apologize if I don't get the plot down to a T. But that's basically the gist of it. Ayato's role in this quest is to stop this political drama from getting out of hand and keep the couple safe from any potential danger, I suppose, but that's all he's really there for. I'm just gonna say this off rip. Ayato's story quest is a chronic fucking yap session. 99% of this story quest is just very long scenes of dialogue, and the other 1% is us using Ayato in the test trial. This is horrid, bro. It's one thing to put me in a yap fest of a quest because let's be honest, that's basically just the entire game, but it's another thing to make that yap fest be about two NPCs that I was never there for in the first place. What truly makes this story quest even worse is the fact that at the very end of it, we get a scene of Ayato talk about his actual past and what happened to his father and how the stress of being in a Kamisato clan ended his life too early. And you're gonna see this type of shit being talked about in another story quest later on in this video. But this type of shit specifically pisses me off because it's essentially Hoiver shoving in our faces that they clearly have some meaningful material that could be adapted into a story quest for these characters, but they choose not to do that and it just becomes dialogue instead. Like, who is doing this shit, bro? I see some people trying to defend Ayato's story quest as actually being good or not that bad because it shows us that Ayato is politically cunning and smart and knows his way around the clans. And while that is a decent point, I could also make the point that aspect should just be naturally expected from his character, because if Ayato wasn't politically smart or cunning in some way, why would he be the head of the Kamisato clan or the Yashiro commissioner? That's like glazing the president of the United States because he's politically smart, when that's already expected from him in the first place. Or at least I hope so. I mean, I don't know, bro can't even tell that his birthday cake is being fucking incinerated in front of him. But if you want to bring that up, then I believe it would be much better for us to once again have a story quest that shows us how he became as smart and cunning as he is. What challenges did he have to go through to become the Yashiro commissioner? Why is he the character he is today? And so forth. It would be a lot more impactful and personal that way, and then we'd actually learn a lot more about Ayato as a character. Because let's be honest, you motherfuckers who made Ayato most likely don't know shit about him. And I don't either, but that's the problem. When you have story quests like these three I just presented in this video, it can be almost damn near detrimental to the characters they represent because the story quests themselves are not represented the characters were there for in the first place, probably causing people to become less interested in those characters simply because we don't know anything about them. NPCs should never be the spotlight of any character story quest, although they are needed in story quests because one character cannot carry a story all the way through by themselves. The focus should never be entirely shifted onto them. If you want to bring up the argument of world building, once again, that's what world quests are for. World quests are for world building. We can explore Inaya and her father's relationship in a world quest. We can save Kato's brother in a world quest. We can explore Kamaji's and Chisato's marriage in a world quest because that is where they belong, rather than in a story quest about a 5-star character plastered all over it, making us assume we are about to receive a story specifically about that 5-star character. It's not like these NPCs and their stories and issues are totally uninteresting, it's just that they don't belong in story quests. It's fine if you enjoy politics and whatnot in Ayato's story quest, but you cannot say you're learning about his character because the only things about him that you're learning are things you should have already known about his character based on his surface level information alone. You are not learning what makes Ayato Ayato. You're not learning why he is Ayato, how he is Ayato. You're not really learning anything about Ayato. It is not a story about Ayato. It is a story about Chisato and Kamaji's marriage that Ayato just so happens to be helping them with. With that in mind, let's move on to the story quests, which in my opinion are good representations of well-made or good story quests. Not only do all 3 of these story quests in my opinion make us learn something new, interesting, or heartfelt about the 5-star character we're there for, but they also balance the spotlight between NPCs and 5 stars beautifully. Child's story quest starts off with us needing to defeat a ruin guard that's just doing a whole lot of nothing, I guess. After we defeat the ruin guard, this random ass kid spawns out of nowhere named Tusser and starts calling the ruin guard Mr. Cyclops. We then figured out after talking with this kid that he's actually Child's little brother from Snezhnaya, in which, by the way, there's no fucking way this kid traveled all the way from Snezhnaya to Leeway just use a bag of money. That's way too much plot armor, bro. You're not Timmy.
You make a pinky promise, you keep it all your life. You break a pinky promise, I throw you on the ice. The cold will kill the pinky that once betrayed your friend. The frost will freeze your tongue off so you never lie again.
So then we take Tusser to meet Child, and Child makes us play with him for the time being because Child needs to do his evil business for the Fatui. The thing is though, is that Child is never telling Tusser that he's a part of the Fatui. Instead, he's telling him that he's a toy salesman in order to not ruin Tusser's preconceived thoughts and dreams about Child and Mr. Cyclops. Off the bat, this is a pretty charming situation since we already know what this implies. Child doesn't want Tusser to get caught up with anything regarding the Fatui because he wants to not only keep him safe, but also wants to protect Tusser's dream that Child is the best toy salesman in Leeway and that his brother is a hero. It shows us that even though Child lives an extremely dangerous life and is always in pursuit of more danger, he never wants that danger to reach Tusser and disrupt his innocence. We hang out with Tusser for a bit until he wants to go meet Child again, causing an interruption with Child's conversation between some treasure hoarders. And it's really funny because Child always has to make some wordplay about selling toys whenever Tusser is near, so that way he doesn't find out what's really happening. This culminates into Tusser wanting to go to a toy workshop, which Child does take him to one, but it's actually a ruin guard workshop. The moment Tusser walks his ass in there, he gets trapped behind a door, causing us to need to save him before he gets fucking obliterated by a ruin guard. And this is where the best part about the story quest happens. In order to protect Tusser's innocence about Mr. Cyclops, Child tells him to close his eyes and count down for a surprise he's got for him. But secretly, he activates his foul legacy mode in order to stop the 3 ruin guards from harming Tusser, and when it's all said and done, Tusser is none the wiser to the fact that his ass was about to get decimated by these giant robots, and Child is put out of commission for the time being. This is just a very heartwarming and cool scene to experience, especially when you realize that Child, even though still being weakened from his last time of using the foul legacy mode, uses it again and puts his own life on the line, just to not only save Tusser, but also preserve his innocence and wonder. Anybody who has a sibling they would protect no matter what would relate to this, and it really does give insight on Child as a character and what he cares about other than just fighting. He even gives a great speech about how preserving a child's dreams is the most important thing to do because those dreams can be easily shattered. This is just a really cute, funny, and heartwarming story quest to go through, and every time I remember a good story quest, Child's story quest always pops up in my mind for this reason. Ito's story quest, in my opinion, is the strongest example of a really well done story quest out of all 3 of these. When I finished this story quest, I was like, this is exactly how you make a story quest, bro. Like, it's damn near perfect in what I want from a story quest. We're not entirely perfect because Yelan is nowhere to be seen inside of it, but still a great story quest. The story quest starts off with us receiving a commission from Catherine to arrest Ito and take him to the Tenryou commission because apparently bro is wanted for a crime he did. Apparently Ito had stolen some shit from people, so we go around asking people as to why he would do that or where he is, and then we get to this detective who tells us a tale between the red Oni and the blue Oni. Basically, a long ass time ago, there was a blood Oni and a Crip Oni. The humans were scared of the blood Oni, so Crip Oni pulled up and said, hey look, I'll make myself look bad and you chase me to make yourself look good. And the plan worked, and everybody loved the blood Oni, but then the Crip Oni left because he was no longer accepted by society, since he portrayed himself to be the bad Oni, and from then on, generations of Crip Onis sacrificed themselves and their reputations for years just to allow the blood Onis to integrate themselves into Inazuma society. After we learn all of that, we go to find Ito on Yashiori Island, and I just want to say this right now, Max Mittelman's voice acting for Ito is some of the best voice acting I have heard for any character in this game. Second only to Yawan, of course, but Ito's voice acting is definitely top 3. It easily carries any quest Ito is in. His voice acting alone makes this story quest so much better than many others. Except for Yawan's. Yawan's is an exception. After nearly killing Ito with some we actually meet up with Ito's family, well part family, since Granny Oni is the one who adopted Ito, but Daisuke is just some random ass kid Ito saved from some evil samurai whose parents got captured by them. Nonetheless, this is still interesting because I never knew Ito was adopted or had a family before this. I always thought his gang was his only family, so it's nice that I learned that about Ito. We then get some more lore on the Crip Oni and the Blood Oni and how they made a pact to keep their Oni pride whilst establishing themselves in society. Then we go to find the actual Crip Oni who committed these crimes instead of Ito, that Oni being Takuya. And the dynamic between the two is pretty interesting. You see, Takuya is committing these crimes because he's abandoned his Oni pride and the oath made between the Onis, because his people and himself are just struggling, whilst Ito is just doing dumb shit with the freedom he has. And I can actually understand the criticism Takuya is making here towards Ito. I mean, imagine being expected to naturally sacrifice your entire reputation just for the people you're making that sacrifice for, not holding up the other end of their deal and just fooling around and not taking things seriously. It's completely understandable why Takuya is this way and why he's doing these things. Takuya is also upset towards Ito for the fact that Ito intervened while Takuya was committing the crimes, causing Ito to also be at fault for them and taking the blame, which is something Takuya really hates because that isn't Ito's role in this scenario. He was supposed to look the other way and let Takuya take the full blame because that is the sacrifice Takuya is expected to make according to the oath. But Ito, being the dumb, altruistic person he is, doesn't want Takuya to just throw his life away for him no matter what oath he has to follow, because he's an Oni just like him and Onis need to stick together. The storytelling here is impeccable. The dynamic between these two is immediately so personal and understandable, especially since Takuya isn't really a copy and pasted NPC this time like so many others in the story quest, but he actually has Oni horns and some muscles to his character. It actually makes him stand out from the rest. After that, we start finding some samurais of Ito's gang. We follow Takuya into his hideout with the thieves he joined. Takuya tries to sacrifice himself once again for Ito, but Ito saves Takuya before he could do so. And finally, Ito and Takuya both get arrested for this whole debacle, but it leaves Takuya feeling like he's been accepted due to Ito wanting him to be in his gang, and the story quest ends off there. The previous animation between the Crip Onis and the Blood Onis is now changed to a more current one, where the Crip Oni is finally accepted into a social gathering, no longer being an outcast, and the Blood Oni that accepts him is hinted to be Ito at the end. This is just a very great story quest through and through. We learn that Ito has a family, we learn the entire history behind his past generations, and we learn how selfless of a character Ito really is, as he was fully willing to take the blame of the crimes committed by Takuya because he understands that none of this was Takuya's fault. He was just a lost, self-destructive person who grew up expecting to follow an oath that never benefited him nor his people. This is easily a 10 out of 10 story quest. We learned so much about Ito and the dynamic between him and Takuya. It's one of the best story quests I have ever experienced, besides from the other ones. Surprisingly, I don't see the community looking back on Eula's story quest with much love or appreciation, but I kinda understand that. But the only reason I'm putting Eula's story quest up here is because I still do remember that even for it being a really simple story quest, it had exactly what I do expect from a character story quest. And also because if I keep rewatching these story quests on YouTube, I might actually lose my frontal lobe. Eula's story quest starts off with Jean asking us to investigate a dude named Schubert near Mondstadt's walls because he's acting a bit sus. When we do find him and try to talk to him, he turns out to be a complete asshole, glazing himself beyond belief because he's a noble from the Lawrence clan, which was essentially a royal clan in Mondstadt hundreds of years ago that loved that slavery business. I would know. Schubert wants to re-establish the dominance the Lawrence clan once had and decides to work with the Fatui to accomplish that goal. Since he's too much of an asshole to speak with, we need to learn how to speak asshole. So Amber informs us that Schubert is Eula's uncle, and the best way to learn how to speak with him is from Eula. So we find Eula in the middle of being a girl boss and she starts speaking like an asshole too, which is good because we need to learn how to do that to figure out what Schubert is doing. We then go on a whole adventure through Mondstadt City with Eula as she teaches us how to speak like an aristocrat, and we really see how much the people of Mondstadt hate Eula. To be honest, if Eula just learned to stop talking to people the way she does, I'm 100% sure the people of Mondstadt would start liking her more, especially since she's literally holding the biggest dump truck in Mondstadt City. There's no way all of the men in that city could hate her, if you know what I'm saying. Anyways, after we're done learning how to speak like an aristocrat, we then travel to Dragonspine where we do some training to learn how to remain composed and elegant. Apparently, after we're done with that, we go to get a bite to eat with Eula and we come up with this idea to give Schubert this specific dish whose name that I would dare never to try to pronounce. And this dish is basically our gateway to getting Schubert to open up to us since it's like a renowned dish back in the day for them. So we find Schubert and give him the dish and he starts glazing us like we're one of him, and he literally just trusts us enough to take us to his secret hideout he's had with the Fatui that he's been using to plot the downfall of Mondstadt City and re-establish the Lawrence clan's dominance. But of course, we ain't gonna let him do that shit, so we expose ourselves to him. He tries to run off, but Eula is actually there to stop him and have Schubert arrested for his conspiracies against Mondstadt, and that's the end of Eula's story quest. The reason why I look so fondly upon this story quest is because firstly, it's actually one of the more shorter story quests, which is always a W. We always appreciate quests that don't take more than a decade to do. I also appreciate this story quest because it helps us learn just how tragic of a character Eula is. Eula is a character who was naturally born with the odds against her due to her family's history. She's a good person at heart who doesn't agree with her family's rule and actions in the past and objectifies against that whilst also trying to do good in the world, but people always tend to look past that because of, once again, her family's past, which is something she never had control of in the first place. And the story quest makes sure to teach us about this every step of the way. I even feel like some people can relate to this. Some people have had a sibling or a family member who did horrible things, became infamous off of it, and now gets harped on for that or judged due to that family member. Like, do y'all ever take a second to realize how serial killers' families feel? Yeah. That shit's gotta fucking suck, and I bet they never hear the end of it. And that's the same situation Eula is in. Feels like no matter what Eula does, no matter how much she tries to do for her nation, people will always look at her a certain way due to something she could never control. On top of that, she had to arrest her own uncle, in which, asshole or not, Schubert is still Eula's family. It takes a lot of balls to do that to another family member regardless. Eula's story quest shows us how sad her character really is in a very simple way, and I've always appreciated that.
I'm just edging to do it already. It's going in!
You will notice that there's one specific thing that is making these story quests work with their NPCs. It's the fact that all three of these NPCs in these story quests are all either personally connected or related to the 5-star the story quest is surrounding on. When you learn about these NPCs in these story quests and who they are, you simultaneously learn about the 5-star as well along the way, causing a good balance between the focus on the 5-star and the NPC. I could make an argument that the NPCs we see in Nilu's, Yae Miko's, and Ayato's story quests wouldn't have a real reason to be there as they don't really specifically need that certain 5-star to help accomplish their journey or go through their story. But the NPCs we see in Child's, Ito's, and Eula's story quests wouldn't be there or wouldn't have their stories told without the 5-star character also being there. Tuser would have no reason to be in Leeway unless it was to meet Child. Takia would have no reason to do, well, literally anything he does in Ito's story quest if it wasn't for Ito's actions, and Schubert would have probably never been apprehended if it wasn't for Eula ensuring that we could trick him and in turn arrest him for his crimes. The spotlight is never entirely shifted onto any of these NPCs except for maybe Tuser. You can make an argument for that, but Tuser was the one who made us learn just how much Child really loves him and what type of person Child really is for the people he cares about. This is how you correctly implement NPCs into a character story quest. You don't make that NPC suddenly turn up with a random problem and now that whole problem is the center of attention for the rest of the quest, pushing the 5-star character to the side. You make it as to where if that NPC wasn't in that story quest to boost the plot, then the 5-star character we're there for would have never grown as a character or make us learn something about them. I would also like to give some honorable mentions to some story quests that I also think are pretty ass. For instance, Sino's story quest is really just a bore. We don't learn anything about Sino, we don't learn about his past, we don't learn anything cool like how he became the General Mahamatra or anything. Instead, we're just there to investigate a case of canned knowledge smuggling, only to learn that the leader of the whole operation was one of Sino's close acquaintances from the past. And then he started yapping about something, but honestly, whatever he was yapping about, I was kind of feeling what he was saying, to be honest. Like, he was kind of spin. But throughout the whole story quest, ironically, the character I hated the most was Sino. He was just so awfully boring and uninteresting throughout the whole thing. The man was literally built like a robot, no emotions, just nothing. And I understand that's kind of how his character is, but at the same time, isn't this the same dude that likes to tell horrible jokes because he has a sense of humor? I don't know, Sino was just really too much of a bore for me in this quest, making it mad uninteresting. Hu Tao's story quest focuses on trying to get this ghost kid named Big G for some reason to pass on peacefully into the afterlife, but once again could have had a story quest about how Hu Tao traveled to Wu Wang Hill to find her grandfather's spirit only to realize it was long gone, and that's how she obtained her vision. We once again don't really learn anything about Hu Tao from her story quest as well. Now, in my personal opinion, the storytelling in Genshin Impact has become drastically better and more engaging with the release of Fontaine. Fontaine's Archon quest is the best Archon quest in the game so far. I don't care what your opinion is, what I said is just a fact that you're gonna have to deal with that. Anyways, since the storytelling has become a lot better recently, how are the newer 5-star story quests holding up so far? Well, they're actually doing pretty well. When it comes to Lin Yi's story quest, I'm not going to go in depth into it because it's been so long ago and I don't really feel like rewatching it, but from what I do remember, Lin Yi's story quest is basically a murder mystery surrounding this magician named Caesar and a person named the Phantom Weasel. This story quest incorporates a lot of NPCs into it, which at first I thought would lead into this becoming an NPC story quest, but actually wrapped all the way back to Lin Yi at the end since most of the NPCs were actually personally connected to him in some way. Navia's story quest is still a little weird to me, and I need to formulate a good opinion on hers. I'm really not sure how to feel about it, but I don't particularly feel like it's bad or really good. I'm just not sure how to feel about it yet. Nervalet's story quest is actually the best one to have been released in my opinion, since it does technically surround a Melusine named Kiara, but once again, since Nervalet is personally connected to the Melusines. As we learned about Kiara and the situation she's in, we also learned about Nervalet. We learned why he became the Chief of Justice, we learned why he's so protective over Kiara due to a really bad past incident occurring 400 years ago to another Melusine, and we also see Nervalet realize that the world around him is much different than the world 400 years ago. Now, I wish I could say the same about Wriothesley's story quest. This story quest is the first one during the release of Fontaine that reminded me just how bad and frustrating these story quests can get. You guys want to know what the plot of Wriothesley's story quest is? Do you really want to know? Man, it might be too deep for you guys. You may not be able to handle it, so I'm just going to try to give my best description of the plot in Wriothesley's story quest. There is a group of people in prison, but this group of people are very special because they all wear hats. But this one guy who wears a hat is evil. He's an evil hat guy, but in a hat, which makes him more evil. And the evil hat guy is controlling all the other hat guys, and Wriothesley has to stop him. So Wriothesley beats up the evil hat guy, and that's it. That's basically the whole plot of Wriothesley's story quest. We don't get any backstory to his character. We don't get anything that inherently makes him grow as a character. It's basically just him doing his job and protecting a bunch of people in the Fortress of Meripede who all wear hats as a gimmick. I understand that they want to portray what life inside the fortress is really like and how different people react differently to its environment, but once again, dude, put that in a world quest. But you want to know what really pissed me off about Wriothesley's story quest? Remember in the Ayato section of this video what I said, we're going to see this backstory dialogue represented in another story quest later on in this video? Yeah, well, this is that fucking story quest. After we defeat the evil hat guy, Wriothesley posed a common story quest trope of wasting our time and having us wait a day or two to have lunch with them. Now, I thought that this was just going to be filler dialogue, just useless shit that I don't have to worry about, just shit to stop me from getting my 60 primos for just a few more minutes. So we're just sitting down here with Wriothesley having lunch. I'm not really paying attention as usual. I got a YouTube video running in the background or whatnot, and we ask him the question of why was he so mad at the evil hat guy? Why was he so passionate about taking the evil hat guy down? And I shit you not, this man opens his mouth and bar for bar tells us this.
Ah, that's a bit of a long story. I once had a similar experience. It had to do with the host family I lived with as a child. I was an orphan, adopted by a couple with a great deal of love in their hearts. I had many siblings, and we all adored each other. Once we were older, Mom and Dad would turn us over to be individually adopted by families of greater means. They were perfect parents. Or so I thought. And then, I found out we were merely raised as livestock. Once we had reached a certain age, our parents would bring us to the market for sale. All children that were sold would leave the house, and nobody would know what became of them. As for those who didn't sell, they were merely disposed of. I was also not the first to find out about the truth. All those who found out before me were simply added to the disposal pile. They did all of that, but never considered how their actions would utterly ruin all the children they took under their wing. Worse, perhaps they never cared about that at all. But I did. So in the end, I killed them and set all of the remaining children free. I was convicted for my crimes and exiled to the fortress of Meripede.
Ah.
My methods were extreme, yes. But I was still a teenager at the time. I'd been betrayed by those I trusted most, and I didn't think that more moderate ways would solve the problem. My doubt and helpless anger pushed me forward until I got what I deserved. It's all right. You don't have to tell me what you think. I've already committed to this path, regardless of what anyone may say about it.
I had to pause my YouTube video playing in the background and fully take in what this man just told us. Okay, so basically what you mean to tell me is that Risley, when he was a little kid, had adoptive parents who would sell other kids that they adopted off into other families, and the kids that never got adopted are implied to be killed? And in response to not being disposed of like the rest of them, he killed his own adoptive parents, freed the other children, and that's the reason he got sent to the fortress of Meripede? I can just never understand the thought process of these story quests when it comes to this. Do you guys understand how much better Risley's story quest would have been if this orphan story about him was animated instead of the evil hat guy one? Oh, but apparently that's the reason he was so upset at Dujier, the evil hat guy, because he reminded him of those adoptive parents because he was manipulative and abusive just like them. Go fuck yourself. You do not just put that in some dialogue and never have it be explored somewhere it should have been explored. If that story about Risley told us, was adapted, so many people would learn about Risley's dark past. It would have been a highly entertaining story quest. But nope, we gotta take down Evil Hat Guy instead. Risley's story quest is just a major L for this. It's even worse than when Ayato did it because this man just casually sits down and tells us he fucking killed his own adoptive parents because they were killing his adopted brothers and sisters. Motherfuckers full on Batman out here in secret and expect us to just be cool with it. Before I end off with my conclusion for this gigantic yap fest of a video, I would like to touch on hangout events. You guys know what hangout events are, right? They're either that thing in your quest tab that you still have never touched or keep procrastinating on doing, or you have all of them completed because you were abhorrently down bad for Primos 1 week. I'ma say it like how it is. 4 stars deserve story quests just as much as 5 stars do because truth be told, a lot of 4 stars are more important and powerful in the lore than some of these 5 stars. For instance, why the fuck is Yoimiya a 5-star? Why the fuck does Yoimiya even have a vision? She literally didn't do anything. It says in her lore that she did nothing and she got a vision. Meanwhile, you got NPCs out here going through traumatic life experiences and still not getting one. Now look, I don't hate Yoimiya. She's actually my top 3 favorite Genshin characters, with Yelan being second, Yelan being first. But in reality, she has no reason to be a 5-star, let alone getting 2 whole ass story quests when Venti still only has 1. It would have been nice to see some of these 4 stars lore being adapted into story quests because it would make a lot of people remember these 4 stars a lot more, because a lot of these motherfuckers are just being straight forgotten. Though I think I've been ranting on long enough about this, so you guys probably already get the point I'm trying to make, but I'll just condense it all here. The biggest problem with a lot of Genshin story quests is that they shift the spotlight completely onto an NPC, disregarding anything that we could have learned about the 5-star we're actually there for. A lot of these 5-stars have pre-existing or pre-written lore that would have done just fine for their story quest, since at least it would be a story specifically regarding them and their past and make us learn something new or interesting about them. The only reason NPCs should be in story quests is to help boost the journey of the 5-star character we're there for, not for them to only boost their own story. It's not like we can't learn about an NPC and a 5-star at the same time in the same story. As long as it is implemented correctly with balance, then neither will the 5-star that we're there for, nor will the NPC the story wants to push for some reason get completely disregarded in favor for one another. If you want to bring up the argument of world building, Once again, that's what world quests are for. These NPCs and their stories and problems should be addressed and explored in world quests. World building should not necessarily be a factor in a 5-star character's personal story quest. It's a story about them and their character, not necessarily about the world around them. With that in mind, I really do hope Hoyoverse does better with these characters' story quests, since in all honesty, I feel like creating actual good and memorable quests for these characters could make the wider part of the community enjoy and appreciate them a lot more for the character that they are, and thus be more interested in them as a whole. And with all that being said, I am not going to shut the fuck up for the next 2 to 3 weeks or so until I come back with another video idea, because this one is over. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you dislike and unsubscribe. My New Year's resolution for 2024 is to reach 0 subscribers by the end of the year, so if we could get that done, I would highly appreciate that. Also, if you want to join the Discord server, the link is down in the description. Finally, just don't do any illegal shit and you'll be fine, I promise. And always remember, Yelan single-handedly solos your favorite character in Genshin and in all of fiction.